Morning, everybody. Very nice to see everybody on this Cascade morning. Cascade is a raw black. By the end of this session, you'll know more about raw blacks, presumably, than you do now. You'll also know more about Yunnan than you do now. So that's what we're going to focus on. But before we start with the raw blacks, let's do shop news. This is my favorite part of every session, most sessions. And this session, what we're going to talk about is change in the shop. So we are rearranging the look and feel of the shop. We are about 40 to 50% done, and you'll already notice as you come in the shop, things are changing. By the time we're finished with this, the shop will look much bigger, because what's happened is we're taking some of the tea which is leaked out onto the shop floor, and we're rearranging, we're consolidating, and we have to do all of this because, contrary to what I said maybe 3 or 4 months ago, and you all, I'm sure, remember that I said, we are not getting any new teas this year. Now, somehow, I think I say this every year, but I said it with such conviction. And I remember when I said it on camera. That's why I said it on camera 4 months ago. We really aren't getting new teas this year. Turns out that just like every year, I lied again. No self-control. We're going to get new teas this year. And it looks like instead of 30 like we did last year, we're only going to get 15. So this is improvement. It's 50% better than what we did last year after I said we're not getting new teas. So actually, this should be reason for everybody to celebrate. We are going to still get new teas, only 15 of them or so. We don't know yet exactly what we're going to get because that's still to come in terms of all the samples. We've already sampled some of the green teas, and we already know we're going to get more green teas. 1 or 2 is what we believe. So that's in the works for this year. We also have some further news that, because conditions seem to be, how do I want to say this, probably relaxing a little bit. One of the things we're going to do research on in this next quarter is whether we can actually do a trip to China next year. Now, you've heard both Xiaobei and I say ardently that we miss going to China, but that ardently we are not going until it's safe. Well, we're detecting that it might be easing up in terms of safety issues. So in that regard, just so that you're not caught off guard, and also just so that you don't hear this through the grapevine, if we do decide that we think from all the research we're doing, both here, everywhere, that it might be safe enough, then in the fall, we will undoubtedly take a quick trip ourselves to the intended destination, which, by the way, would be the Yunnan Mountains. It would be a shorter trip. So we need to investigate and make sure that what we're thinking might be true. And then if all the conditions are correctly met, we would let everybody know and open it up for the possibility of a real trip next year in the spring. We'll keep you informed of details. There are no more details right now because again, until we go and really, really ascertain that it is safe, there are no more details. We continue to do our research, but that's when you'll know. So we'll announce sometime next fall. Ergo, by the way, if we take this trip in the fall, we're going to be closed again for probably 2 weeks, because not only will we go to China, we will also make a lightning trip to Japan, because I think what we told you earlier is that we can't get, even though there's a tea or two that will be eligible to be on our boards from Japan, we can't get it in bulk yet because we don't have the relationships. Well, we're starting, and we already started in April when we were there, this journey of relationship building. We will continue on that journey with a lightning quick trip in the fall if we decide to go to China. So these are all things that are upcoming. Don't want you to be surprised. Don't want you to think that all of a sudden, gosh, they don't love us anymore. They're closing the shops so often. Where's our benefit? So the benefit will be that if we ascertain it's safe, we will do a trip next year. All right, so that's the main shop news. Let's now get into raw black. Let's now get into Yunnan. Yunnan is a huge province, and it's got a long, complicated history. There are many places, many of you have probably visited some of the most famous places in Yunnan: Kunming, Lijiang, Dali. These places are all accessible. They're easy to organize to get to because there's regular buses that go to these places. There's regular flights that go to these places. This is not where we're going today. Where we're going today is the Ailao Mountains. The Ailao Mountains run north and south, and let me modify that a little bit. So they run from the eastern part of Yunnan, north and south towards the western, that's ridiculous, towards the southern part of Yunnan in an eastern direction. Boy, that sounds really complicated. So think of a slanted line north and south. That's really what I'm trying to get across. And this area is hugely wild and untamed. What does untamed mean? The way I just used it is there isn't very much development in much of the Ailao Mountains. There's a huge, enormous forest reserve there, and it's a World Heritage Site that is also undeveloped. And again, the thought should be coming to you, wait a minute, didn't he say it was a World Heritage Site, which means it's not supposed to be developed? I did say that, and that does mean that, but when I say undeveloped, what I'm really referring to is the infrastructure to get people there, to allow them to get into the park, and to allow them to explore the area is undeveloped. And some places of this wild reserve are actually still dangerous. They're dangerous, and even within China, it's not fully understood at a micro level what the dangers are. They know that it's not exactly safe because wild animals, wild insects, all of these things exist in abundance. You can only travel in most parts of this World Heritage Site on trails. You have to walk, you have to use 2 legs. You can't even just say, well, I'm going to helicopter in. Oh yeah, really? helicopter in through the forest? I don't think so. Maybe if you're one of those high altitude, low opening sky jumpers, yes, you could sky jump into the forest. But that's not the way this forest is set up. This forest has small apes in it. What type of apes? We usually call those apes gibbons. And these animals, along with other animals, make it dangerous. Also, the terrain is not easy to traverse. It's got huge watershed running through it. They have insects that probably haven't been cataloged, some of which you probably enjoy seeing, some of which you probably wouldn't enjoy seeing. So the Chinese are working on this, and they're sending people to various parts of this forest reserve. But this is the home of wild tea trees, old growth tea trees. Throughout the Ailao Mountains, you have 3 major areas of old growth tea trees. And I used those words sloppily, didn't I? For those of you who've been with us to the Ailao Mountains, and we took a group there in 2019, you know that I misspoke just now. Not old growth. You have old growth as well. Ancient grove wild trees. You also have a variety of species of wild trees in there. The main one is thought to be the source of all tea trees. That's Camellia thaliensis. Have you ever drunk tea at Sophie's from Camellia thaliensis? The answer is no. Have Xiaobei and I ever drank tea from Camellia sinensis? Answer is yes. We have not found yet any that's done in enough bulk that we can bring it here, or any that meets our standards for the boards, but eventually we will. So when you think about this mountain range, and you think about where these tea trees, these ancient groves, these 3 ancient groves are located, one word must exist in your brain, and that is Western slopes. That was 2 words. I'm having a hard time this morning. 1 and 2. Oh, well. You're used to this. So it's the western slopes that have these ancient groves. So this should suggest something to you. It should suggest that the pH of the soil, as well as the other microclimates in these areas, are favorable for tea trees. Also, that the soil microbes are favorable in this area for ancient trees. And they are. And they've done a lot of research on this. The elevations for which these groves are anywhere from about 4,000 feet above sea level to about 7,000 feet above sea level. How come you don't find it on the eastern slopes? The pH is different. The surrounding forest is different. The microclimates are different. The terroir is different. So you don't find it on the eastern slopes. Does that mean that on the western slopes it's lush and wonderful, and on the eastern slopes it's barren and horrible? Answer is no. The eastern slopes are forested as well. They just don't have ancient growth tea trees. So that's the difference. So you have to know where to look when you're looking for these ancient groves. Today, what we're going to have is Cascade. Cascade is not from an ancient tree. It's from an old tree. So let's get our terminology defined again. Old in Yunnan means between 100 and about 1,000 years. Is this a term that every scientist in the world will understand? The answer is no. This is a term that's locally used to characterize old and ancient in this particular province, in this particular area. Sometimes the scientists use old. So in the Yunnan Mountains, what constitutes old? 70 years old. What constitutes ancient? They say over 700 years old. So each area has a different definition, but you can see the overall meaning. Old is, yeah, we got some age here. As long or a little older, a little longer than humans live. Ancient is over some relatively large number. So Cascade is older. It's probably around 400 to 700 years old, that particular grove of trees. Now, one of you or all of you are already about to ask me a question, so I'm going to answer it. I can feel the energy in the air. Why is it named Cascade? The area where these trees are, huge watershed. And so really, as I was thinking, what is it about these Lao Shu Shengpu? So this is what they call this particular varietal, Lao Shu Shengpu. Now, let's give you a literal translation. Old tree, raw black. Oh, the problem with this translation, oh, there's no problem with the translation because I'm making it. That means it's a great translation. The problem overall is that all the raw blacks from the Ailao are Lao Shu Shengpu. Sometimes they put a village name at the end, but that's confusing for Western customers. So we can't have that naming convention. Cascade is the one we use for this particular varietal or this particular area because there are so many small waterfalls. That's what highlights this area. You go into this area because it's not growing as if it were planted by man. It's growing kind of randomly in this heavily forested, heavily watersheded area. So Cascade was the name that we came up with for this. Raw black. So black in general means that there's some sort of fermentation. Remembering that we're using the Chinese terminology, and it's a translation of the Chinese terminology because the Chinese have, some Chinese have a revisionist type of translation for the term hey. Hey cha. So hey literally has always meant black. But, you know, because there's confusion in the West about black tea, and, you know, the Chinese call it red tea, but the British started off by calling it black tea, and then that spread. So you've got a group of people in China to try and distinguish and make it easier for Westerners or foreigners, and they call it dark tea. I don't like to say dark tea. Here in this shop, it's black tea, the way it should be. So you have, in quotes, ripe or fully fermented versus raw or on the way towards fermentation. Price-wise, how should we think about fully fermented and on the way? You know, ripe and raw. Now let's see. If I go to the store, usually when I think of ripe, a ripe melon versus one that's not ripe, well, it should be about the same price, right? Roughly, shouldn't it be? And in fact, maybe the ripe one should be being sold at a discount. So as it turns out, the ripe is cheaper overall than the raw. Why is that? because the raw, think wine for a minute. So when you go to Napa or Sonoma or Burgundy or Champagne in France, you know, if you get something that's this year, there's almost, especially if it's a red, there's almost always the thought, okay, let's judge this. It's probably going to be a little strong this year, but we can tell it's going to mellow. It's going to become better as it ages, right? So you got wine cellars, you put it away, and 10 years later, it's really good. Well, for the ripe versus raw, once you have fully ripened, and that process takes between 45 and 60 days, it's artificially composted, your flavor is set basically for life, especially nowadays. In the old days, that didn't used to be true. Okay, let's define now and old days. Now you know. Old days, though, means 1973. 1973 is the watershed year for pu'er, because in that year, the Chinese government stamped and said, this process is now protected. We accept this process. The IP is, yeah, we recognize it's safe. You can do this. Was it being done pre-1973? Yes, there was a long period of experimentation, 57 or so, all the way up to 1973. But the government did not acknowledge that it was safe and that it was a process that could be IP. 1973, they approve it. And then after that time, the first 15 years, so 1973 to about 1988, during that period, the people who were doing this artificially processed were not doing a full 100% ripen. What they were doing was something to the effect of about 80%. And then they would let the rest of the ripening occur naturally. That was the process at that time. So you actually did have change. Post 1988, they were fully ripening, and that was it. So flavor-wise, what you got out of the factory that year, post 1988, that's what you were going to have essentially all the rest of the time. Now, would there be small changes in maybe mellowness? Yeah, you can have some small changes in mellowness, but the flavor was essentially the same. All right, so that's the ripe. But today we're talking about the raw. You've heard me say this many times. I call it unfinished or 70% finished tea. That's not what the Chinese call it. They call it mouthfeel. But it means the same thing. You go through a process with the early stage leaves, and then you stop that process and put the tea away. You stabilize it, of course, and you put it away so that it changes year by year. So what you're drinking today, when we do Cascade, is from 2019. We've got raw in here from 2007. So that's 16 years old. So that changes both visibly in terms of tea liquor, as well as in terms of aroma, in terms of flavor. And that's why the cost of raw is so much greater than the cost of ripe. You have to make evaluations early on, right? So you harvest in 2023 and you figure it's going to take 30 years for this to become completely ripened naturally. But we don't know what it's going to taste like in that span of time. So you have to make a judgment, just like with wine. This has come off in a certain way. We believe that after 10 years, it will be another way. This is what we have in this shop. We have this range between 2007 all the way up to last year, 2022. And the stuff, no, the leaves in the latest version, in other words, 2022, are always going to have more astringency. They're always going to be more forward. And as it ripens, what does as it ripens means? That sounds like it's hanging. We hang it on a tree so that it gets some sunlight and, you know, get some sweetness to it. Answer is no. Ripens means you put it in storage, by the way, cool storage, dark storage, away from sunlight storage. And the microbes work on the leaves and change the flavor profile. Is it only microbes that are changing the flavor profile? Answer is no. There's some other process going on too, but that process kicks in about year 5, year 6, year 7 as a more aggressive process, and that's oxidation. At the beginning, it's all about the fermentation. Those microbes, that's a biological process, right? Microbes, yeast, fungi, all consuming or interacting with leaves. Oxidation is a chemical reaction with the air. So you have both of those processes kind of in competition. I envision them in competition. They don't envision themselves as in competition, but just so that you have a sense, you have both processes going on. And that is what I mean by ripening. It's changing the flavor profile. Does it change anything else? Oh, yes, it changes the look and feel of the leaves as well. Does it change the chemical composition? Absolutely. So as you are seeing and watching and experiencing the tea, you're also getting a changed chemical composition in you. So what sorts of things change? The same thing that changes with oxidation. So catechins, you get a percentage of those that go into other polyphenols. You get amino acids, which change into other substances, and that's why you get flavor change. So these are all the things that are going on with these teas. Yes.
If is 2019 is 2019 the year when Cascade was harvested, or when it first became fully ripened?
Okay, great question. So the questioner asks, in 2019, does that mean it was harvested, or does that mean it's all of a sudden become fully ripened? So let's think about that question a minute. I love this question. Fully ripened, when it's picked and processed as unfinished tea, takes at least 30 years. So if it were fully ripened in 2019, that would have meant that in 1989, it was picked, it was harvested, and started that journey, right? But that's not what happened. It was picked in 2019, and it will be fully ripened, in quotes, in 2049. So we have a ways to go. And that's why I mentioned the oldest one we have is Newman. Newman is 2007, harvested in that year and started the ripening process in that year. And so that's a 16-year-old. All right, and the tea master says I'm extraordinarily late in allowing you to go ahead and taste this. And I apologize for that. Usually I have better time control on another line. Well, it sounded good though. So it is my great pleasure to bring forth the indomitable Tea master.
早上好，你好吗？呀，我们做生普 rub like 生普 tea. So this is the I think table so formula this is the I use 4 glass, so this is my tea trays you can open it turn. It's cute it's different animals. So this is my style. Okay, thank you. I take the water.
Yeah. So she set up a tableau here, 4 cups. You only need 2 cups. The reason she sets up 4 cups is because when you're going through this brewing process, you have to treat this like green tea, because unfinished tea is essentially green tea that's going to be worked on, that's going to be developed into fully ripened tea after a certain amount of time. So you use a lower temperature to begin with. Later on, when it's fully ripened, you can use a higher temperature. So she makes sure that all the cups are clean. She uses 200-degree water, but you could use any temperature water between 212 and 175. We happen to use 200 because that is what we have programmed into our water machine. This making sure that all the cups are spotless, no residue of anything. The strainer has no residue of anything. I'm pouring it on the tea toy just because it's fun to do that.
170.
No,
175.
yes, that's correct. No,
175.
175, yeah. So we're gonna use 175-degree water, just as we wrote in the instructions to you. Some of the raw black, especially if it's from ancient tree, we would tend to use lower. But because this is from old tree, not only can this withstand somewhat hotter, it should be brewed slightly hotter. So she's using these 4 cups to dissipate the steam. And by the way, again, if you're going to err in terms of temperature, there's only one way to err on this type of tea, and that's err lower. Do not err higher. So she felt the cup, she's satisfied, she's getting out the tea leaves, getting them prepared, and putting them in the heated cup. I'm going to shake the cup, not because it's fun, although it is fun. Trying to distribute heat to all the leaves to wake them up, so to speak. And she's pouring the already dissipated steam water into a kettle so that she can control the flow as she pours in the cup. Set the timer. This song, 3 minutes.
One of the participants says he was thinking that the next Indiana Jones movie should be Indiana Jones and the Search for the Lost Tea Tree.
What a great idea. And since Harrison Ford is still alive, this would be just a perfect movie for him. Love that suggestion.
He could play your father.
There you go.
Just kidding.
Oh no, that would put me at 19 while I'm actually 21. 19 looks good on me. So all right, so the tea leaves look like this. You see that there's some on the bottom, some on the top. It's beautiful, aesthetically aesthetically pleasing. Don't do what I just did, which is to spill some of the tea liquor out. See, I was giving you a contrary example of what not to do. This is a teaching tip. Yes.
Are there any experiments being done to accelerate the aging process, like storing at a higher temperature?
This is a really interesting question. Are there experiments being done to see whether they can speed the natural aging process? And the whole issue was storing at a higher temperature. By the way, people have done that, is that you lose some of the good flavor. It just doesn't seem to retain its good flavor if you store at a higher temperature. As Americans, we like to think of creative ways to do things, which is a good thing. But some of these creative ways just won't work with tea leaves. Tea leaves have their own defined way that they're going to develop. If you store, okay, here's the issue. If you store at a higher temperature, what happens to fermentation? Fermentation has a sweet spot. If you store at a higher temperature, then that sweet spot stops. At some point, you can stop fermentation once you get to a certain temperature. That's undesirable. Oxidation also is affected by temperature. So there have been many, many years of study about temperature and storage and airflow, all of these things. And this seems to be the sweet spot, what we're doing here.
Participant says notes that the email said 2 minutes was the brew time for the first.
In that case, I made a mistake. What I put in the email was the correct time. So do 2 minutes, my apologies. The written stuff is always double checked. The spoken stuff just comes out impulsively. However, it won't be bad if you brewed more than, well, you're not brewed. When you brew, it won't be bad if you brewed a little longer, but this is the ideal. 2 minutes is the ideal. So it should look somewhat like this. Nice color. Very characteristic raw black smell. And we'll talk about that in a minute, because almost all the raw blacks have a certain type of aroma that's within a range. It very rarely falls far out of that range. So we'll talk about this one, and then we'll talk about how far away you can get in that range. In the meantime, let's enter the quality arena. No, you're not doing that. I'm entering the quality arena first. So what am I trying to do? Check for astringency, check for aftertaste, then energetics, how you feel after you drink the tea. These are all the things you're looking for. First time around, so I'm taking 175 degrees sip. Wow, I already discovered something interesting. Okay. The second sip, you're verifying what you think you detected on the first sip. In addition, you're working in aroma and you're working in taste. Okay, and you're definitely paying attention to energetics. And I already have a sense of energetics. And by the way, no need to feel anything at all in terms of energetics, because we're all slightly different in how we perceive these things. So if you don't feel an energetic, nothing wrong with you. You're genetically set up a little bit differently. Zero problem. All right, it's your turn to
2 minutes.
brew.
I
Yes,
forgot.
2 minutes. Yeah, that was my mistake.
No, I missed it. I forgot. Oh,
So I repeat again, It's a 2-minute steep time, not a 3-minute,
Yeah.
as I originally said.
也看这个
All right, and you draw your water, you get yourself all squared away. And make sure all the glasses are spotless. Remember, this is all part of tea rhythm. No rush. Just trying to make sure that you get every step taken care of. Tea Master is drawing 175-degree water now. It's going to dissipate the steam. So part of why I started off talking about the places it's easy to get to is to draw a contrast of how few people have actually gone to this area. It's very few Westerners have gone to this area, not no Westerners, but very few. And it's just hard to get to. You have a hard time getting into this place. You can't enter, technically you can't enter the forest reserve, the wildlife forest reserve, unless there are actual people at the gate, which there usually aren't. The gate is locked. There are people who patrol within the forest. They have a staff. When we were there, I think they have a staff of about 30 that work on varying shifts and patrol the forest, and they're looking for poachers, they're looking for unusual wildlife activity, because some of that wildlife activity they prefer not to get close to the villages. There are villages in this area, and while some things you can't control, some things you can control, remembering that this wildlife area has predators in it as well. And so that's the type of thing that they're looking for, particularly vis-a-vis being close to the villages. All right, so you have poured the 175-degree water in, you've started your timer, 2-minute steeping. You're heating the recipient cup. All right. And so again, the reason that I drew that contrast is because so few people really do get a chance to come and look at this. The group that we took in 2019 had a chance to go into this forest, and they did. And that was a remarkable opportunity. And that's something that we requested special permission from the provincial government to allow, because ordinarily you can't just walk into this place and enter, because it is truly off limits. All right. Yes.
One of the participants says the warm leaves are fresh and bright on the nose like spring flowers, also sweet and vegetal at the same time.
Love this. Warm leaves, bright on the nose like spring flowers, slight sweetness in that, and vegetality in the aroma. And I like this description a lot, because many people who drink raw black are drinking plantation raw black, monoclonal. It's not aged. Monoclonal is really astringent. You don't normally get sweetness out of the monoclonal, but this tells you that what I told you about the provenance of this is accurate. You can't, if it's from good stock, you cannot normally get a raw black like this and not have it be sweet. It will have a hint of sweetness to it. All right, the timer has expired. You're gonna separate the tea leaves from the tea liquor. Remember, you're not in a hurry. And you're gonna go through your quality evaluation. Remembering that yours should look about like this. So take your time. You already should notice some things about the aroma.
One of the participants says he would add that the malt scent on the warmed leaves is mild and round.
Malt scent on the warm leaves is mild and round. And again, this tells you I haven't lied about the provenance. Old tree is always, if it's been processed correctly, going to be round. It also tells you I haven't lied about the age of this, because as soon as you start aging this, any initial astringency it may have had will be muted. Yes.
Another participant says, to her, the dry leaves smell green, in quotes, with hints of malt and kind of juicy, but the wet leaves have this sweet hay, grassy aroma.
Dry leaves smell green with a hint of malt to this participant. Wet leaves have a hint of hay and grassiness and sweet. Yeah, hay, grassiness, and sweet. All of those are inbounds. That is great description. And again, what it tells you is the other thing that I said to you early on, which is this is not far from green tea. This is 3 years removed from that real greenness that you get from all green teas. But it's removed from that, but it isn't dramatically removed. It's moving away from that towards a ripening process. And it's 1/10 of the way there. It's 3 years old. I can't count. That's 4 years old. It's 4 years old. It's a little under 1/10. No, actually a little over 1/10. My math and counting skills very bad. It must not be 11 o'clock yet. On Saturday mornings, 11 o'clock, my math and counting skills become great. Yes.
Participant says, am I crazy or do I detect a sense of cider in the scent of the tea liquor? And actually, he said maybe both of those can be true. So
Love this comment because the participant is saying, in effect, hey, there's some fruitiness in this as well. The participant didn't use the word fruitiness. They used the word cider. Love that because cider, while fruity, it also suggests a juiciness. You didn't use the word juicy, but by using cider, it implies fruitiness and juiciness, and absolutely. Yes.
another participant says the flavor started off with a bit of sweetness, but then as it cools, she's getting this earthiness coming through. She's also found that the liquor gave off a scent for her of jasmine flowers, very mild astringency at the tip of the tongue. So the comment starts with, flavor starts with a bit of sweetness and then earthiness comes through.
Bit of sweetness at the beginning and then earthiness comes through. And I like this comment because what are we doing? Or what are the farmers intending to have happen when they go through this process? They are looking for that change over the years to develop into an earthiness, but it's not the same earthiness that you get from the fully ripe. And that's the thing, you used the words correctly because you didn't say loaminess. You know, fully ripe, a really good fully ripe either has a loaminess or a deep earthiness or a woodsiness to it if you have a really unusual fully ripened. This with the suggestion of earth arising within the tea liquor, especially as it's cooling, suggests that, yes, it isn't like normal green tea. What is normal green tea? False. It isn't like green tea. Green tea, when you drink that, you almost never go to earthy. You almost always either go to grassy or vegetal, sometimes a little sweet, sometimes umami, but you almost never make that turn and say earthy. This is the fermentation process at work, and you're tasting the beginning parts of that.
And she, another part of this participant's comment, and somebody else just echoed it, is this sense of dryness and maybe a light astringency on the tongue.
Yeah, a sense of dryness and light astringency on the tongue. That's how I detect it as well. If this were plantation tea, you wouldn't be saying that to me. You'd be saying, oh my God, this is at the height of this stringency that I want to tolerate. It's that different in terms of the fact that it's plantation. And what I mean, plantation is a shortcut, a short way of saying monoclonal, and they're tea bushes. They're not tea trees, and they don't have age.
And when you say plantation, that also makes me wonder about more industrialized processing, and raw black seems to be a purely craft. Like, is there any such thing as an industrialized version of this?
Oh, I love this question. Is there industrialized raw black production? So what's meant by this question is, take a look, or remember that with red teas, you go to Chiman Needle area, and you've got these processing plants that produce upwards of 20 tons of tea during the season. And they're doing it with all this modernized machinery, and for everything that's below a certain grade. So from 4 on down to 10, all of that is industrialized. So the question really is, is there such a thing as industrialized raw black? And what would it look like? And the answer is yes. There are factories that produce at that level. Probably not 20 tons, probably more like 10 to 15 tons. And the industrialized tastes different, yes, than the fully handcrafted. What you're tasting here is fully handcrafted, and it's handcrafted out in the Ailao Mountains. Industrialized is always brought back into the city. So you would not see an industrialized unless it were coming from a place like Menghai or Jingdong. These places have big plants, and the plant owners go to the farms and they're usually, by the way, not going after old bush, because old bush is expensive. Old tree is expensive. Whereas the monoclonal, imagine, for those of you who've gone to China, imagine seeing row after row after row of tea bush side by side by side. That's what I'm talking about.
Participant says for her, the astringency becomes more prominent as she drinks further into the cup.
Oh, that's interesting. Astringency for this particular participant is more and more obvious as she drinks down further into the cup. And I haven't drunk down enough to notice that. Oh, you know why? Actually, I can explain this because I'm thinking about this as what I'm feeling in my mouth. In a way, and this will sound a little strange until you think about it, the astringency, which is very light in the first few sips, because you continue to drink, it accumulates on the tongue is the feeling that I get. And so, yeah, a great comment. And thanks for calling that out, because you're right. There is an accumulation of astringency on the tongue.
One of the participants comments on the leaves. She says the infused leaves beautifully opened up a bit, revealing a fresh looking yellow greenish color with some light brown.
Infused leaves open up a bit, slightly greenish, slightly yellowish. What other
A little
color?
bit light brown.
Light brown, in the leaves. And yeah, that is accurate. And when you do a second brew, these things really open up. You know, right now they're still in this ropey configuration, but when you do that second brew, you'll get more of the fullness of the leaves. Good observation.
Somebody else gives a ditto on the astringency, getting more pronounced for her as well as she drinks down. Another person comments that she's getting more sweetness and fragrance, followed by the vegetality in the infused leaves.
More sweetness and fragrance in the infused leaves as she drinks down, as this participant drinks down in the cup. And that's a fair comment. Not only that, I would add juiciness. The impression of juiciness for me increases along with the sweetness, increases with the hints of vegetality. And usually, you know, you don't usually say those two words in the same sentence, sweetness and vegetality. But this type of tea, it's safe to do that because you really do get both of those feelings. And it's really, really nice. All right. How am I doing? Ah, yes. We really wanted you to have a careful evaluation of this because next week we're going to do another raw black forest reserve, which is from a different part of the Ailao Mountains. So I hope you've taken really, really good notes because I'd like you to be able to compare the two, and there's a definite difference. You'll see some of the similarities, which will make you think, yeah, this is probably from the Ailao Mountains, but you'll also definitely see the differences. Mountain by mountain, area by area, as you drink these more and more, you'll get a distinctness of taste. The other thing to note about these are undamaged. And what I mean by that is the villagers in this area who, indigenous peoples, they've been there for time immemorial. That means a long time. They have always built their villages away from the tea trees. So there's never interference in terms of pollutants in the soil next to the tea trees. They usually have to hike 4 or 5 miles to get to these tea trees. So there's considerable distance, and therefore the soil configuration in terms of the microbes there is still very, very healthy. You don't have a lot of people treading through this area. In fact, you don't really have anybody except those who live there and occasionally us. And it's just a remarkable feeling when you're in this forest because it's like you're both alone and then in a heavily populated forest. So let me explain that. Alone in the sense of there is not another human. Fully populated, you hear all these birds, you see all these butterflies and other large insects. You hear rustlings in the forest. You don't know what they are exactly. So there's lots of activity going on in these forests, and it's truly wonderful. The other thing you hear, which to me always is a sign of health, is you hear the water running through the forest. This area has an incredible amount, again, of watershed in it.
One of the participants says, do I detect some minerality, question mark, and then a comment on the tea liquor, soft, denser yet soft and delicate on the palate, in terms of the tea liquor.
Tea liquor itself, soft and what?
Soft, somehow, it's a little of everything, I think, from this comment. Dense yet soft and
Dense yet
delicate
soft.
and
Okay.
the palate.
All right, dense yet soft. I like this because there is, and so the way I understand what you just said, and I agree with what you said, is that it is full body, but it isn't overwhelming you because it's so mellow. And that goes back to the juiciness. You can easily drink this. Yes, there's definitely that feel. What's the first part of that comment, which was really interesting?
Was saying, hey, do I detect some minerality?
Minerality. Okay, the question about minerality. All right, so let me put it this way. While I detect soil because earthiness, I myself do not detect minerality. Now, that doesn't mean that you aren't a better or more fully able to appreciate all the elements that are there. It just means that I don't detect minerality in the same way I usually understand minerality. And remember, I'm prejudiced, aren't I? I'm prejudiced because I live in the Cliff Tea area. And so when you say minerality to me, right away, my mind goes to that type of minerality. But I have a feeling really you're indicating another type of minerality, which is a hint, truly just a hint of something from the soil. And that I can certainly accept.
This person also says in terms of energetics, halfway through the cup, it's giving her a nourishing, invigorated feeling.
A nourishing, invigorating feeling in terms of energetics halfway through the cup. Love that comment. I accept that one. I get that nourishing feeling in terms of a warmth for me. I have a warmth throughout the upper part of my body. It's just pleasant. It's not warmth in the same way that red tea is warming to me. Red tea warming is make me perspire warming. This warming is just a pleasant feeling. Yeah, like a big hug.
Another participant says after sipping the tea, he can more intensely smell the scent of the peaches in the bowl near him.
Ah,
Kind of interesting.
this is really an interesting comment. And it's interesting because we don't talk about this very much. So this participant said after drinking the tea, their senses become heightened. And so the bowl of peaches, it was peaches, right?
Mhm.
Which is close by. This participant senses it more, senses them more in terms of the aroma. Some teas actually do seem to heighten the senses. And for me, this is also a tea that heightens the senses. And I am loath to usually talk about this, but since you brought it up, yeah, absolutely. My senses become heightened.
People are commenting they love the flavor and astringency of the tea, that it has a very refined quality to it. And folks are also appreciating that this description of the forest just sounds very spiritual, like the trees of souls, souls of trees live in there.
Oh, I love the entire comment I love, but I especially like the comment that somehow I have been able to communicate, or we've been able to communicate the souls of the trees. When I walk through the forest, I feel those souls. I would never say that stuff out loud. I just did. That's because you said it first. But there is that sense that the forest is so alive in every aspect. And so from that standpoint, I definitely feel the souls. And, you know, I really like that you've gone there. And I don't mean this in some weird way about, oh, the trees wake up. you know, and accompany me on the path. No, that's not what I'm really talking about. I'm talking about the sense of them being alive and the sense of them being part of a whole ecosystem of aliveness. And I believe that that's probably what you were suggesting in terms of the souls. What was the other part of that comment? There was one other thing I wanted to note.
The spirit, let's see, yeah, sorry, I moved several, comments here. Spiritual quality to the forest, a love of the flavor and stringency of this tea.
Okay, I think oh, and it was remarkably easy to drink. I think that was part of, and this is remarkably easy to drink. There is nothing in here that interferes with an appreciation. There's a balance to this tea. Already there's a balance. This thing is only 4 years old and it's already achieved a balance.
Question about food pairing, which actually another participant said, well, the peaches actually seem like they would go nicely, but.
Peaches would go great with this. And this, by the way, if somebody tells you, hey, you know, I love tea, but don't give me green tea because, you know, green tea's bitter. I just don't give that to me. You could faithfully give them this because it's not green tea. And then after they experience it and appreciate it, you could then discuss how close this is to green tea. So yeah, anything that is going to be lighter in flavor is going to end up being a nice pairing with this because this will kind of wash everything out. It's that type of juiciness which just absorbs everything you had in your mouth. All right. I've had a lot of fun today. I hope you have with this as well. We have so many favorite teas. So if I tell you this is one of our favorite teas, you'll say that's a lie. And I'll understand why you're saying that. But it indeed, in fact, is a tea that we love drinking when we are just in a relaxed mood. So I'm glad we were able to get through this one today. You've made many, many great comments about this tea. And I look forward to doing Forest Reserve. Save your notes because Forest Reserve will blow you away in other ways next week. So your responsibility this week, have a great week. We'll see you next week with Forest Reserve. Bye-bye now.
Bye.